This is Les for That's My Entertainment, and I'm lucky enough to be chatting with Nyasa Hardiman, writer and director of Sea Fever.
Thank you so much for making time. My wife and I actually got to watch the screener for Sea Fever last night. So I always love when I can pair getting to speak to the person so close to actually getting to see it.
Oh, well, I am delighted that you had time to watch it, and thank you very much for taking the time to make the call.
I actually had something get in my eye right before our call, and so prepping my notes for this while messing with my eyes was really adding to the overall horror of the movie, I think. I don't want to spoil this for anyone who hasn't seen it, but you'll get what I'm talking about later. In looking through your background and so many of my favorite shows that you've touched on, Jessica Jones episodes and Z, can you talk a bit about getting to make your feature film kind of directorial debut, getting to make something in Ireland for the first time in a while, and why this project?
Well, you're right that I've been lucky enough to work on some great projects and to collaborate with some terrific writers in bringing their work to the screen, not least the brilliant Melissa Rosenberg, who wrote Jessica Jones, and the brilliant Sally Wainwright, who wrote Happy Valley, both of which are stories about complex, conflicted, damaged women who carry grief with them, but who also have a really profound moral compass and who overcome their limitations and overcome their own difficulties in order to act in a truly heroic way. And for me, that's a really powerful form of storytelling. I love noir, and I was really interested in making another noir story and another feminist noir story that would speak to that idea of somebody who's a central figure who's complex, who's conflicted, who has troubles and carries difficulties and limitations with them, but also manages to overcome those things and to act in a truly heroic manner. And I've always written, and I've always been really interested in the storytelling the storytelling aspect of my own craft. That was a real joy to write a feature film that I could direct myself, and I'm lucky enough to have been funded to write other feature films, which I hope will come up in the next while. In terms of what I wanted the film to be, I think the first thing for me was that character, was finding that character and developing her. And I haven't really spoken very much about this, but I was really interested in that idea of I think at this moment in time, I felt I had seen a lot of popular depictions of scientists that were not very positive, that were not very pro-science. And I find that really worrying and disturbing, because for me, the greatest invention that we have come up with as a species is the scientific method. Like, it's just so extraordinary and so brilliant, and it's so rooted in humility, and it's so rooted in the ruthless pursuit of truth against really a lot of our human instincts, and it's really hard to do. And I wanted to write a story that really valorized that, and that really valorized the idea of, reaching beyond your instincts and reaching beyond your prejudices and reaching beyond, the things that make us all human, our own limitations and our own idées fixes and our own preconceptions, and how, rigorous, proper, dispassionate thinking is an incredibly valuable skill. So that was something that I really wanted to explore in the story. And it was really melding those things together into a character who, she's not diagnosed, and she's never been diagnosed, and she's perfectly capable, healthy person living her life. But you could trace in her character some of those traits that we associate with Asperger's. So she is somebody who is drawn to science for very particular reasons. And not all scientists are like this. And in fact, the story has another scientist who is not like this. You know, there's an engineer on board in the story who's incredibly warm-hearted and open and funny and very gregarious and socially able. But it just so happens our central figure embodies some of the cliches of you know, less forgiving or less protections of scientists that we associate with the kind of cliche of scientists. You know, people who are loners, who struggle to communicate, who maybe are quite monomaniacal in terms of how they work. And what I wanted to do was sort of drill down into that and go, well, where does that cliche come from, and what is it really? And I was very interested in the idea of somebody who is neurodiverse, who is maybe carrying with them some of the traits of Asperger's syndrome or some of the traits associated with autism, and go, is this what we're talking about? When we use that cliche, is this really what we're talking about? And what are the values and difficulties of somebody who is neurodiverse, who does think differently, who does adhere to that sort of hostile stereotype? Because the thing about Siobhan is she is socially deaf. You know, she does have that quality that we associate with some kinds of autism and with people who might exhibit Asperger's. You know, she's not good at picking up subtext, and she doesn't really understand people, and that's really painful. That is a really painful thing to live with, and a really lonely thing to live with. Just because you're not good at it doesn't mean you don't want it or crave it or need it like every other human. And that's what she enters the story with. But she is also somebody who understands that the qualities that make her socially deaf, the neural qualities, her neurodiversity, also make her very good at focus and an incredibly moral person. And if you were hanging off the edge of the cliff, you would want a neurodiverse person like Siobhan holding onto the rope that was going to drag you back up off the edge of that cliff, because she would never let go. And that's what she does in this story, is that she is the person who just never lets go. And she is the person who never stops thinking and who never stops using the scientific method, however painful, however self-sacrificing that may be, to try to think rationally and not emotionally in a crisis.
And you could argue that there is still a bigger picture emotional thinking to it, even, or that moral compass you speak of. She ends up being the character that makes a fantastic point where I was yelling at the screen, I'm sorry, all the rest of you are wrong, and you have to do what she's saying. Like, you all understand that she is not suddenly being the villain here. And you're right. I feel like in a lot of movies recently or in my lifetime, she would have been the cold, calculating villain. Like, you can't trust the scientists because they're just out to... Exactly right. I mean,
because they have no human feeling. Yeah.
There's definitely a shared DNA here, no pun intended, with Alien as far as the family crew on a boat, the slight outsider kind of thing, and how beautifully you established that. But like you say, just because she's bad at this doesn't mean she doesn't want it.
Exactly right.
I loved her professor at the very start, or the older scientist chastising her as a student, because I had that experience in college of a professor going, "Hey, I know you're going to ace my class, but I see you. You can't be like this."
Yeah.
Because for a lot of us, I feel like a lot of the initial withdrawing from social stuff or putting up walls as we were going through adolescence comes from people doing stuff that just makes no sense. The first time you get pranked or trolled or messed with or something, and it's an emotional thing from the other kids, and you go, "Have logic, damn you!" And you could see the set of kids that find the scientific method and go, "Oh God, here is somewhere where I can be rewarded, where these skills are valuable and not mocked. That makes sense to me." And so when she leaves school and goes on the boat at the very start of the movie, at first I thought, oh, she doesn't have any school friends because she's a poor kid whose family's from... Nope, she doesn't get along with these people either. And then it led to what for me was the most interesting part of the movie. the setup of tension between superstition as community, these shared control rules that we all know, and if you know, then you're in the club, and we all knock wood, and redheads don't go on the boat, and things like that, that are part of the kind of oral tradition family bond of the crew, and how both scientific method silly she finds it, but also personally silly. Like, so I'm bad just because, okay. But that put against this idea that that sometimes maybe superstitions come from a creature we don't know about, or a combination of environmental factors that we haven't realized. I'm fascinated by this idea that maybe ghost stories throughout history are
they have a root in something, right? Yeah.
Similarly, what happens to this crew on this boat is a beautiful exploration to me of where a story might have come from and the reality that you deal with. And then I love her reaction of not spending the third act trying to kill it.
Oh, good.
That she.
I'm really glad you liked that.
That she bothers to, like, it's terrifying, but it just mistook our boat and we got to return it. I loved that. It gave a different. The tension was still there. The movie still functioned in terms of setting up a tension, but it just wasn't the tension I expected. It would have been so much easier to go another direction. Was that something you were conscious of while writing it, that you wanted to do with this movie?
100%. 100%. David Hare, the very brilliant playwright and screenwriter, said to me once, a feature film is 3 stories. There's a story in the first act, there's a big story in the second act, and there's a story in the third act. He said, most writers are not good enough to come up with 3 good stories. Most of them will only come up with 2.
Mm.
And, that's David Hare. But it really stayed with me, that idea. And when I came to write this film, because, obviously it is, what I'm trying to do is tell a dramatic story with a dreamlike element, tell a dramatic story that has a central metaphor, as you say. And when it came to that third act, when I was kind of, thinking about what is this story? Like, how do we want this story to resolve? What is the third story here? What I really, really did not want to do was what you and I and 100 million people have seen before, which is at the end of the second act, the third act spins into chase fight, showdown.
Yeah.
And for me, actually, that is a failure of finding a third story. And also, it felt really wrong for that character, exactly as you say. Like, she is not somebody who is going to kill this thing because she is afraid of it. That just isn't who she is.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a kind of, that's a lashing out, kicking back response that is completely alien to her as character. That she has to be true to herself. She has to be true to her own life, and she has to be true to her own morality. And from her point of view, which I would say is truthful, there is no reason to kill this thing.
No.
Why would you?
But I love that doesn't mean that she's not afraid of it. It's terrifying.
No, exactly. Yeah, but if it's very rare, then it has just as much of a right to exist, if not more of a right to exist, than she does.
Yeah. I quite liked the characterization and of course how that ends up playing out. Gives her an opportunity to be a hero in a way that, when I was surprised by it, I realized that it was only a surprise because of an implicit bias I didn't know I had.
Oh, good.
And that was a wonderful moment of oh wow, I was banking on this going a different direction the entire movie, not for any storytelling reason, but just because that's how these go. And
yeah. I'm delighted that you thought that.
Can you talk about the actual shooting of this? How much time did you get to spend? I know shooting on the water can be a nightmare sometimes for productions. There's Hollywood's littered with the history of places that have blown their budget. Can you talk a bit about shooting on the boat and trying to construct an independent film production shoot schedule that involves so much nature?
Absolutely. And just before I do that, you've thank you so much for your careful viewing of the film, because it's so lovely to have somebody come back with them, having read the fine grain that you try and put in as a filmmaker, and to have somebody meet you halfway like that when they're viewing the film, going, I see that, I see what you're doing, is incredibly exciting and really rewarding. So thank you. I'm delighted that you picked up on that idea of that. Like, I didn't want the film to have any baddies. I didn't want the film to have anybody who's just sort of illogically and horrible, or illogically at loggerheads. That that everybody in the story comes to the story and the events of the story with their own pain and their own difficulties and their own hopes and dreams, and they all have a really rich backstory, and they all have strengths, and they all have weaknesses. And it was really important for me when I was thinking about the kind of the big themes in the story, which, as you point out, are the scientific method versus a kind of emotional logic. And the emotional logic is, we'll write out the bad luck, and if I knock on wood, everything will be okay. And if we crack jokes, it'll feel all right. And what I wanted to try and do, in the same way that there's no baddies in the story, is to say, look, if there's an extreme of thinking in a really rigorous and emotional way, it's that actually, if you are a complete realist all the time, life can be very hard, because, of course, we're all dealing with chaos all the time. And if you really, really face up to the fact that you don't really control very much in your life, and, everything is fleeting and death is coming, that's a pretty hard way to live. And there's some, when I was researching the film, there's some evidence that the more of a realist you are, it can actually affect mood. It can cause you to become downhearted, and it can also cause you to become isolated. And that, in fact, it's not unhealthy for us as people to have a little sprinkling of magical thinking in our lives. That we sort of presume we know what somebody else is thinking, and that allows us to feel close to them. And we allow ourselves to be overly optimistic about what's coming in the future, because it makes us feel good. And there's nothing wrong with being happy. In the story, what I tried to do was to explore that end of the spectrum, if you like, through the grieving couple in the story, as you know, who run the boat. And their lives are really hard. They are living on the edge of a financial precipice. They are pushed by the fact that there has been hideous overfishing. They've been pushed and pushed and pushed, so that they're in danger of losing the boat. They have absolutely no money. They cannot pay their crew. The only way that they can work, and this is all true, these are people who live like this, is by going deeper and deeper and deeper into the Atlantic, into uncharted waters. It's incredibly dangerous. And at the same time, this couple are carrying the grief of a lost child. So their lives are very tough. And the way that they get through it is with love and with a kind of magical thinking that their daughter is taking care of them. And that's, I hope, very present in the fine grain of the film. And I wanted to explore that and to demonstrate how nourishing that is for those people. And that there is nothing wrong with faith, and there is nothing wrong with emotional logic and magical thinking when it sustains you and nourishes you like that. And that that it's not that the scientific method is always at loggerheads with emotional logic. That emotional logic has its place, if you know what I mean. So sorry, I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, I felt that when they were coming. The information that they get when they go aboard the other boat, and there's a moment where he says, "Don't share this with the rest of the people," and I feel like anyone who's read any Horatio Hornblower or seen any accounts of people on ships, it's always a very real threat of how fast panic can spread on a closed area. Yeah. And so I didn't view him as that could have easily been a villainous moment of let's withhold information from other characters and have our own little secret that puts people in danger. But instead I I knew where he was coming from.
It was an act of protection. Yes,
exactly. And it puts her kind of thinking, it allowed you to bring her kind of thinking in opposition to him later when she just so matter-of-factly says things like, point of fact this, or I have disabled the boat, or
that she's not good at that. She's not good at thinking about how will other people respond emotionally to this information.
Yes, his job is managing the feelings of the crew often, and she has no patience for that.
Yeah, she's really poor at it. She's really deaf to it. Yeah, I think that's really well put. Yeah, he manages the emotions, and he's really good at it. And there's a reason why he leads this team. He's a really good leader, and in every other circumstance, he has been. But he's also a gambler, and he's been forced into a position where he has to gamble more and more.
Yeah. When they have to own up to the gamble he's taken, watching the whole crew turn was beautiful. I think, like you said, you understand every character's backstory. They all make sense as to who they are and why they'd be like this now.
Oh boy, that's great. Anyway, you were asking me about filming on the water.
Yes.
Which it's really hard. It is really hard, as I'm sure you know. Everything takes 4 times as long. It's incredibly dangerous. You have to be super safe. The boat it's designed to sleep. The boat in the story is a real working trawler, and it sleeps 7 people. But it's incredibly tight for filming. It's beautiful. I think it looks beautiful, but it's held together by rust and damp. And it's an incredibly dangerous place to be. And trawlermen are they are at constant risk of serious injuries, and you're more likely. It's the most dangerous job in the UK and Ireland. More people per capita, more people die as a result of working on the trawler than any other job, and you can see why. You're out on the road waves, and also the work itself is incredibly dangerous. And just being on the boat. And, we filmed, the story is set off the west coast of Ireland in the deep Atlantic. And we filmed off the east coast of Ireland in the Irish Sea, which is that channel of water between Ireland and the UK. And it's much quieter than the Atlantic. And even so, the water was pretty rough. And the boat was moving quite a lot, to the extent that, there were members of the cast and crew where it was really unpleasant for them. Their digestive systems were not coping well with the high water. So that was pretty tricky. And then always, of course, any time you're doing anything on the water, and we've got dinghies, we've got boats, we've got the trawler gets into trouble, as you know. So when you're doing that, you always have to have separate safety boats. You've got divers in the water at all times. So it's quite a big production on a very small budget.
Well, thank you so much for taking time tonight to talk to me about it. I could easily spend another 30 minutes asking about exclusion zones and the creature itself and a million other things. It's a beautiful movie, Sea Fever, and I think everybody ought to go check it out when they get a chance.
Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful rest of your night. I can't thank you enough.
Thanks a lot. Lovely to talk to you. Bye-bye.